Hey guys, Henning and Morten from Flip Normals here, and in today's video we are going to be reviewing portfolios. So we have two pieces for you today from portfolios. One is from Peter, which is this Floki likeness sculpt from the series Vikings, and the other one is from, I think it's Vicent, we don't know, who did a dinosaur. So two drastically different pieces, also at different levels in their careers. So I think it'll make a sort of good discussion for what you do at different stages when you're sort of just starting out or when you're further in your career. So for Floki here, we went ahead and found what we assumed to be the reference used for the sculpt. So it's actually very nice because then it gives us something one-to-one to compare to, which is always nice because then we can point out things where you can like try to observe this and execute that in a different way. So one of the things immediately is the eyes, basically. If you look at how small the pupils actually are and the eye where it sits, like compared to his eyes, it's quite big, right? So there's quite a lot of space missing. He gets that more psycho feel when your eyes are this small in your head. And also, it doesn't feel as realistic as compared to something that's in the real world.
It's one of these features which, if your eyes are too small, it just instantly feels a bit weird. And here it's not like a little bit smaller, it's something like 100% smaller. You'll probably have to scale it up to cover twice the volume. So it's very important to get this right. This is also one of the things this one is one of the easier ones because you can literally like measure it. You could take it over the reference and you can simply just see where it is and you can scale it up until you reach the correct size.
Another interesting one is just an observation of wrinkles, right? This is something that appears quite often in people's sculpts throughout their sculpting career. It's the whole issue, I would say, of drawing on your sculpt instead of sculpting on your sculpt. And what I mean by that is like, if we take a look at how this brow raises over here and then transitions into a more permanent wrinkle, you can see like he's probably raising his brows quite a lot and has done for his entire life. So therefore he has this permanent wrinkle, and that's what we see sort of exaggerated over here. Now, Peter's tried to do this as well. The problem is that these are sort of more, they're like drawn on, they're not sculpted, so we're missing volume. Like this is actually quite a massive bulge he has here in his wrinkle. And you can see that the interesting part is like the fleshy bit is here, just this part right here. Fleshy bit stops. There's no fleshy bit right here. Despite of that, the wrinkle actually continues. But we only see a little bit of bulging here, and I can see that he's tried to replicate this, but it's a little uneven. It's very undulated, where this is because you raise your brow, this is the skin and whatever's there gets pretty tight. So everything's squeezed out, like out towards the viewer, and therefore it loses a lot of definition. So this would actually be a very clean shape that sort of bulges out.
The way I like to think about this is when one area compresses, then another area stretches. So you're stretching the eyebrow up. Then if one area stretches, one area has to compress. The amount of skin is still the same. So the skin has to go somewhere. So there's less skin in one area. Well, now it creates a fold in the other area because now it's compressed into one shape.
It's kind of like if you have a balloon, right? It's like one of those like long clown balloons. If you squeeze on one end of the balloon, the other end of the balloon starts to inflate more, and then you deflate that part, and the part where your hand was before then starts to inflate. So it's kind of the same principle. Mass doesn't disappear; it has to be moved somewhere else. And the same thing goes for this. Like when you raise your brow, then sometimes you'll pull on this brow and it'll pull towards the center of the nose. That's why we get this wrinkle here. You can see Peter's done the same here. But again, it's like with this wrinkle here where it feels more drawn on instead of moving the volume of mass and then painting it on. It feels painted on instead of sort of like, let's build up the volume here.
One problem with this reference is it's not doing you any favors because it looks like it's overcast lighting.
Yeah.
It's very hard to see any definition. You can, if you know what's going on with the bony landmarks, then you can start to define something. But if you're not super strong in that, it's very tricky to get this right just because it's so diffuse. The lighting is so diffuse.
Yeah, I mean, to his credit, I saw this piece and instantly I recognized it was, I don't know what the actor is, but I instantly recognized there was Floki from Lycan. So it was like, okay, cool. So good job. Definitely you hit some kind of likeness there that you can read that it's the character. But also these kind of likeness sculpts or studies are super hard because it doesn't take a lot before all of a sudden it doesn't actually look like the character anymore.
Yeah, if the beard here, for instance, it doesn't have the exact same shape. Like it looks like the reference has more of a mustache and like a soul patch, and doesn't have much of a beard around his chin. Then the likeness is off just because of the beard. Like when you have somebody who shaves and you're like, you don't recognize them, that kind of effect can ruin the likeness.
Yeah, and it's
so
small
tricky.
things like if you look at the angle of the beard, like how steep this angle is from the nose and down, whereas here the beard just kind of like it just fans out pretty straight. So it's like it's a very defined sort of volume that has this V shape almost, whereas here it's almost just like a flat line. So these are like the small subtle things that you kind of have to be on the lookout for, especially when you're doing likeness studies. Another thing could be how he's sort of like, he has this snarl, right? So you see again, he's pulling on his muscles here, which means that we have a buildup of skin and fat right here. So that's why we see the nasal labial fold is very pronounced here, whereas here, not so much because he's only doing it on one side of his face. But with this here, you can see he's tried to do it with the smirk here, get a little bit of a smirk and get this to snarl up, but it's pretty equal on both sides. So there's some emotion here, but it hasn't translated to a volume displacement up here. And it might seem very technical and very nitpicky, but this is what it takes, especially if you're doing likeness studies. You have to look at how does skin move on a person and how does skin move specifically on the person you're trying to sculpt.
One thing which is one of the bigger things for me here is the posture. It's so tricky to get posture right. Well, if you look at the reference, he's really like hunched over. It's like he's leaning into the camera. You can see that the back or the top of the hoodie is actually at way above where the ears are, and in the sculpt here, it's at almost at the angle of the mouth. So if you want to make this intimidating, you don't just want to have like a mug shot like this. This just looks like he's stolen a van and now the police caught him and he's really angry about that. But if you want him to feel threatening, it's like he should lean into you. He should lean into your face. He also has a bit of like asymmetry in him, like he's leaning more to one side in a reference. So it just looks like the guy on the right is way more threatening. The guy to the left, he's kind of standing there and he's just firm. Well, the other guy, he's maybe a bit more like a Loki. He's a bit more agile and
he's sneaky.
He's a bit sneaky. Like he will go up to you and he'll steal something from your pockets and then he'll go back and he'll punch you.
But also because like this guy, there's more confidence in him. Whereas this one, I mean, there's confidence, but it's more like he's got psycho eyes. Like he could kill you. Whereas this guy, he might actually be a wimp. He's he's pretending to be badass, but when it comes down to it, he would just like run away anyway. Another small detail would be like just the nose, the interpretation of the nose. Whereas this guy, he has like this kind of fat grandpa nose where like it's really fat down here. Whereas this nose is very straight, very angular, and it gets very pointy instead of sort of translating that fatness into the nose there. But overall, for me, I read it instantly as it's definitely Floki. So props for that. And there's a lot of really good fundamentals in there, which means that you've been able to build up the face. But it is just about looking at and observing how does skin especially move across the face when you're doing an expression. And then also trying to think about what does the character feel like Henning pointed out, like this skulky, little more sneaky character versus this sculpt feels more maybe confident and like a little more badass, I guess.
It feels a bit like the Joker who got arrested. Just it's a Joker in a Viking costume, a bit less hair.
Now, if we go over to the dinosaur here. Now, obviously, two different skill levels, right? This is more of a beginner sculpt and maybe more of an intermediate sculpt. So there's different things that we would tend to look at. You can't critique everyone in the same way, and different people need different kinds of critique. That's why I think these are going to be interesting picks to look at. So for this one, I was just looking at the software here, and we talked about like he's used Blender and then substance packages. So there's no sculpting. So immediately, that's where we went. We were like, sculpting. Yes, most of the landmarks are sort of in place where they're supposed to be, but with sculpting, you can really take it to the next level. Whether that's adding some fatty deposits here around the legs to make it integrate a little better. You can see I wouldn't think of dinosaurs having these kind of thigh gaps, like the Instagram models are trying to get.
No.
So like trying to fill this in with fat and skin, because that you have that image of dinosaur skin, kind of like reptilian skin like this. If you look at a crocodile or something, where their appendages actually attach, it's very loose. So there's a lot of scaly, loose skin. So trying to incorporate some of that, not sculpting the scaly, loose skin, but actually just sculpting in the fat and the volume for the skin.
Yeah, I would also integrate various elements a bit better. The arms feel a bit floaty. Like I would push them a bit further back, and I would also, what Morten was talking about now, integrate the hind legs into it just a bit more like that.
Yeah, pull these down, so they sit more in the body, but probably also, I don't know, maybe make them shorter or something, because there could be proportional issues with that as well, like trying to balance it out, but definitely what Henning said.
Right now there isn't any anatomy in it per se. Like you have you can see some hints of where the muscles are and some bony stuff, but the next step here, if you want to just to look realistic, which it looks like the artist wants to do, is you just have to sculpt it. The reason I think it wants it to look realistic is because the top render is really realistic. Like it's using a really high level. It looks like a smart material from a Substance Designer. So it looks like that is the end goal. If you want something more stylized, I don't think you would use this kind of skin.
Yeah, and there's definitely, like we talked about, there's definitely an understanding here of where things should go, and there's a base to work from here. So it's not like not starting from scratch. There's a good foundation to start to build something out from, but taking this in and just moving a few things around to proportion it a little bit better, then moving into sculpting. That's really when you can like take it to the next level. And if you are working in Blender, I think for a piece like this, you can definitely sculpt in Blender. You could take it into Blender sculpting there and just amp up some of these volumes, go in, maybe inflate this area so it like not so it intersects, but just so like the belly and the legs start to like they rub up against each other.
And if you're looking into sculpting, we have plenty of sculpting training on our channel for ZBrush or even for Blender. And sculpting is a bit intimidating if you're only used to a polygonal modeling tool like this, but it's really worth it. The quality of your work will just skyrocket like crazy.
That's also what I think is interesting, is that there's actually accompanying topology for this. And this is not something we see that often, especially for people that are starting out and if they're doing a dinosaur or something, they would all very often just jump into ZBrush or Blender and then just start sculpting. But you can obviously see this has been poly modeled, and that in itself is a hard challenge, because it's like we've talked about this before, where you're trying to resolve the design at the same time as you're doing a very technical challenge. So it's a hard thing to do both at the same time.
So if you want to improve this, I would say the steps would be, first, sculpt it up. Don't worry about the topology for now or anything like that. Like, worry about the design for now. Make sure the anatomy is there. Make sure the silhouette is working. Try to get some good feedback on it. Like, we have a FlippedNormal's Discord, which you can find on, I guess, searching on Discord for FlippedNormal, and then try to get some proper feedback on that while you're working.
Another thing, just because there is topology, we thought we'd quickly just talk about the topology. So you can see that there's definitely issues with UV stretching, whereas the head here is receiving it's not as much resolution as the body, just because the size of the scale. You can see how that changes, right? So then if we look at this part, it's a hard thing where you would actually have to cut off the head, UV that differently, and then if you're using something like a tileable in Substance, you would have to probably manually paint those areas so they flow nicely into each other. But more importantly, when it comes to topology, it's just the stretching. Like, one of the most important things when doing topology like this is that we don't end up with long squares like this. We want something to be pretty equally square. And so the distribution of the quads are pretty equal, kind of like the face here. So the face is nice. The distribution looks really good. Then it's just about doing this kind of distribution everywhere. It doesn't have to be the same size, not the same density as the face, because maybe the body doesn't need it or the arms don't need it. But just so we don't end up with stretchy polygons like this, because it makes it harder when you do go into sculpting. This is not going to be as nice to sculpt on as this part.
You also want to make sure that you have more topology in the areas which are going to deform as well, like the elbows and the knees, maybe the fingers, wherever it is going to deform. Then once you have a nice topology, then doing UVs is a lot easier. And also you need to make sure that your model looks good in regular polygon mode and not just with the subdivision surface modifier active. So once it looks good in raw polygons, then you can really start to UV map it. And then once you have that, then you can take this all back into Painter, and now your texturing is going to look 200% better just because you have a better model. Really, for me, when I was texturing for production, the best thing I could do to improve my textures was to improve my model. The better your model is, the easier everything becomes down the line. And then if you scroll all the way up again now, so we can see the textures, then having variation in it, like this is a common way of texturing in the beginning, where you're taking one smart material from, I assume, Designer here, and using it right in Painter, and it just has this really nice scaly feel right away. But that's where you can get up to like 30% really quickly. But if you want to take it up to something like 60 or 70, 80%, you're just going to have to approach this in a more fundamentally different way. The way I would do this, I would still start off with a base, maybe of something tileable, but then I would have a bunch of really cool scaly textures from crocodiles or big lizards, whatever it might be, and I would project it on by hand. And once you project it on by hand, you can turn this into, let's say you're starting off with a color map and you're projecting onto it. Now you can turn this into something like a bump map to really make it look nice. And then you could turn it into a specular roughness map. And then you have some nice textures. Make sure that you are treating every area with respect it needs. You can't procedurally texture something like this. You will have to go in and texture paint the head, the eyes, nose, mouth, the teeth, all the claws. You're just gonna have to treat them as individual units if you want this to look fully realistic. Now that's fully realistic. You can definitely take shortcuts when it comes to using different procedural for different areas. You can mask out the head and use one procedural there, have one mask for the tail and have one procedural there. So there are definitely shortcuts, but if you want to take it to the full level, you're going to have to just spend a lot of time on it, on the texturing, to make sure it's all good.
And I think as a final note for me there, it would be like thinking about, just back to the way the model is structured, it's just thinking about weight and what this creature is actually supposed to be able to do. Like if you look at the size of the thighs here, it's actually, the thighs are a little bit small when you think about that it needs to propel its entire weight just through its legs alone, right? So you would need to beef those up as well. But then also just when it comes to the posture, I think you can get a lot out of just posing this a little bit. It can still be posed symmetrically if you want to do something to it afterwards, but just a little bit of a bend in the knee, perhaps. And then often what you would see with it's kind of like a chicken as well, right? It's kind of like a dinosaur. You would see these being raised up a little more, kind of like if you're doing you go up on your toes by yourself, you get this more dynamic pose. You could do the same for the dinosaur, and then raising its head so it like looks straight ahead instead of like looking like it's looking for something on the ground. But overall, I think it's a solid beginning, and there's definitely potential in this, both when it comes to the sculpting and also, like Henning just mentioned, in terms of the texturing. So yeah, I think that's it. Do you have anything else?
I'm all empty of Flip Normal's tips for this one. It's a really good start. I'm really eager to see this progress in the future.
Yeah. So definitely both good job from Peter and Vincent there with Floki and the dinosaur. So let us know if you want to see more portfolio reviews like this in the future. Make sure to leave a comment down below, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. If you're looking for training or high quality assets, make sure to stop by the Flip Normals marketplace. And if you're interested in supporting us by buying our merchandise, you can check that out in the description below.